Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Dr. Stacy Gallin, founding director of the Friends Institute for Ethics, Human Rights, and the Holocaust. Dr. Gallin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to speak with you today, a really important topic. You joined my colleague, Allie Jackson-Jolly, about 6 months ago, right after October 7th. Now you're here today, and when you joined my colleague back then, you talked about a lack of ethical leadership and how your institute's goal is to remember the past and protect the future. So before we dive into the conversation, can you talk about how that relates to the moment we're in now?
Yes, it's really important to understand that history plays an important role in our current events. When we talk about, as an institute, remembering the past to protect the future, we're talking about understanding the importance of the role that history has played historically in where we are right now. Today is Yom HaShoah, which is Holocaust Remembrance Day, and it's important on this day, more so, I would say, than other days, to really understand that everything is connected. So what we're experiencing right now, the unprecedented rates of anti-Semitism, the last time that we saw something like that was in the 1930s and the 1940s. It started with words. It didn't start with the killing of 6 million Jews. It started with many of the same things that we're seeing now. And of course you want to be cautious and not overuse the Nazi analogy. You don't automatically want to say that what's happening today is the same as what happened then. It's not. Intent is different. You have different climate, you have different culture, and one of the main things that we have is people are standing together today and saying, no, we're not going to let this happen again. Our goal as an institute is to create ethical leaders, to create people that will stand up and speak out when they see injustice, when they see hatred, when they see anti-Semitism or identity-based hate of any kind. We need to make sure that what happened in the past does not happen again. And today, of all days, it's important to have conversations like this.
And so then today where we are almost at the 7-month mark from October 7th, and you recently posed this question for the Times of Israel: can academia regain its moral compass? So talk about how you think it was lost in the first place, because I'm sure you're not going to say it was lost October 7th.
No. I don't think that it's ever easy to say there was one moment in time when anything started, right? It's always part of a story. There's always a beginning, a middle, and an end, which is part of what I talk about in that post. But I think that October 7th was a turning point, because I do think that there are inflection points that we can look at. And I think that October 7th was an inflection point within the history of academia where there was an opportunity. And it was a missed opportunity. There was a chance for the leaders of academia to stand up and condemn terrorism, because that's what it was. October 7th was a blatant act of terrorism. You have a terrorist group. This group was designated by the United States as a foreign terrorist organization back in October of 1997. They went in and they murdered 1,200 innocent Israelis whose only crime was that they were Jewish. Some of this happened at a music festival. Imagine if a music festival like Coachella here, an innocent festival where young people are going just to celebrate, to enjoy a peaceful music concert. They went in, they raped, murdered, tortured, and abducted innocent civilians. There is no way that that should not have been condemned. Now, if you have leaders of an academic institution where the goal is to educate the next generation, when we talk about educating them, obviously we want to raise a generation of ethical people. So to not be able to condemn this act is questionable. It makes you think, why? Why the hesitancy? And I think that really, to me, became the big question.
And so then what did we see come the past few weeks? We saw rises in encampments across the country, rises in protests across the country. What do you think should have been done between October 7th and now then?
I think that there was another major inflection point and another major, honestly, to me, another major failure. And I think that was at the beginning of December when we had these congressional hearings and the question was asked point blank: when you have calls for genocide, the genocide of the Jewish people on your campuses, does that violate your campus's code of conduct? And it was, again, another opportunity for the leaders of these academic institutions to stand up and say, yes. calls for genocide, obviously, violate our code of conduct. But they didn't. Again, there was hesitation. Again, there was an inability to say, that is wrong. So again, it leads you to ask the question, why? Why is there this hesitancy? Why is there this inability to say, clearly, this is morally wrong? And once you kind of start, saying to yourself, what's happening here? Why the lack of moral leadership? Why the inability to criticize things that are so obvious and so egregiously wrong? What is happening? And that sets a precedent. Those two events for me were really, as I said, the turning points. Those two events, when you look back and you see from where we are right now, and you say to yourself, those 2 points, they were the turning points. And they were, in many ways, what allowed us to get to the point where we are now.
So let's talk about Colombia, because that was really what happened there, a triggering point that triggered encampments and protests all throughout the country. The president there, Shafiq, has been criticized on both ends for her reaction and her response. On one end, that she let the encampments go on too long. On the other end, she called the police on the students and the protesters. How do you think she could have responded? What would have been that ethical leadership that you're looking for?
So again, I think it comes down to the idea of the double standard. Natan Sharansky, he came up with this list when he's talking about when you look at Israel and you talk about can you criticize Israel, there's the 3D list. It's delegitimization, demonization, and double standard. If October 7th had happened anywhere else, would these leaders of colleges have stood up and said that was terrorism and we denounce it and we condemn it? If it was another group of people, would they have come out very strongly and said, we absolutely calling for the genocide of any group of people violates our code of conduct? So I think when you look at it, there's a lot more that's tied up. And it takes away from what we're actually talking about, which is, you have to protect the students on your campus. If you are the president of a university, your job, first and foremost, is to protect your students. You have to keep them safe. Your second job is to be able to educate them, but you can't educate them if you can't keep them safe. So I think, to me, it comes down to, once you see that your students are not safe, once you start noticing these things, you have to act quickly, you have to act swiftly to do whatever you can to keep those students safe. You can't respond to criticism. You can't let that influence you. You have to protect your students. And so if you say, well, I want to make sure that I'm protecting these students, right to free speech, or these students' right to protest, at what point does that impinge on the other students who are being physically or verbally harassed or beaten or stalked? There has to be a hierarchy of needs. And I think the hierarchy of needs, as I said, first and foremost, has to be keeping these students safe. And as soon as you see that these students are at risk of not being safe, at that point, you have to act to ensure that you are doing whatever you can to keep them safe.
Let's dive a little deeper in there, because there has been a rise in anti-Semitism all throughout college universities, full stop, since October 7th. Also, some Jewish students have said, I feel unsafe on my campus. Protesters and supporters of these protesters would say that they're demonstrating for peace for Gaza, they're being critical of Israel's policies, and that doesn't cross the line of being anti-Semitic. What do you say to that response?
So I think that, again, peaceful protests, I would go back to the idea that I said before, which is it started with words, right? Words have power, and words lead to actions. So when you look at a lot of these signs that are being, used at these protests, if you see a sign that says something that is clearly inflammatory, I would say that, it's going to make students feel uncomfortable if the signs are calling, again, for the genocide of the Jewish people. Is that truly a peaceful protest? I don't know that it is. I don't know that I would say that it is. I think that there, again, is a fine line between what you would consider a peaceful protest, and a lot of it comes down to definition. I think that that's the first thing. A college should be a place where you can have a respectful exchange of ideas. That's the idea behind higher education in the first place. Again, I would go back to the idea that it is the job of the administrators in higher education to create a safe climate where people from differing backgrounds can have an exchange of ideas. And that exchange of ideas should then lead to respectful disagreements, and peacefully. There should be a way that you can learn from other cultures and you can gain an appreciation for other cultures. But we've seen that that is not actually what's happening. So I think that, you know, when you say kind of this idea about peaceful protest, I also think it's important to understand, when did these protests start, right? The protests did not start until October 7th happened. And while I firmly believe in the right to, you know, respectfully disagree and peacefully protest, we can't forget what, again, was the beginning of this particular portion of the story, which is October 7th, when a terrorist organization brutally raped, murdered, killed, abducted 1,200 people and 240 hostages, many of whom are still in captivity.
To your point, I think the context is important, and I talked to members of Congress on both sides of the aisle who visited the encampments, and they said the protesters were not calling to hold Hamas accountable, not calling for the release of the hostages. So how do you think this conversation needs to be shifted here, and especially when it comes from leadership at the top?
So again, I think that when it comes from leadership at the top, it really troubles me, in particular, that there was a hesitancy to call out what happened on October 7th. A double standard. If this had happened in any other country, if this had happened in any other place, would they have hesitated to say, no, this was terrorism and we need to condemn it right now? And similarly, you know, the congressional hearings at the beginning of December. How can you not, if somebody asks you directly, a direct question, is calling for the genocide of the Jewish people a violation of the Code of Conduct? How can you answer that with anything other than, yes, calling for the genocide of the Jewish people is a direct violation? And if you are a Jewish student at that university, how can you feel safe after the president of the university says that?
And let's talk about who these leaders are. They're presidents at elite universities in this country.
Correct.
So is there a leadership? I mean, clearly you're saying there's a leadership problem at these elite universities. Do you root that out by calling for their resignations? What does that look like?
So I think that, you know, it goes back to the question, right? I don't think that necessarily this is coming from a personal place of anti-Semitism. I think that the problem is much bigger than that. I think that the problem is there's a fear. Obviously, as you said earlier, this didn't start with October 7th. There is a long-standing political conflict in that region. And I think that these presidents of these universities are afraid. They're afraid of what that backlash might look like if they do anything that's perceived as taking the side of Israel. Is it going to impact them, their career? Is it going to impact them politically? Is it going to impact donations to their university? Are they going to have to deal with angry board members? To me, that's moral cowardice. And that is the exact opposite of what we need when we are in a time of crisis. We need leadership. We need moral leadership. Again, going back to, I believe it was your very first question, we need people who are going to stand up when they see injustice. Anyone. When they see injustice against anyone, anywhere, we need leaders who are going to stand up and say, no, no. Because when you don't have leaders like that, again, not to kind of over-rely on the Holocaust analogy, but that's how things like that happen. That's how genocide happens. That's how hatred happens. That is how things get to the point where we are now. If you want to be a leader, you need to lead by example, and you need to understand what ethics looks like and what moral leadership looks like. You can't let external factors like, you know, as I said, economics, politics, you know, cultural, the way in which the culture is leaning at that particular moment in time affect what it is that you are saying. You need to have a moral compass, and you need that moral compass to lead you.
To your point, I actually pulled a quote from your article on the Times of Israel, and I want you to expand on it for us. You wrote this, quote, "The lack of moral courage demonstrated by the leaders of American academic institutions has predictably trickled down to the faculty and students, threatening not only the future of our educational system, but the core of our democracy and our society as a whole." Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, you got to lead by example, right? As you said, we're not talking about, one little elementary school in one town somewhere, that not a lot of people are familiar with. We're talking about supposedly the best of the best academic institutions, honestly, in the world. So if we can't look to these people to guide us, then where are we supposed to look to? These are the people that are leading the institutions that are going to shape the future of our society. If they're not willing to take a stand, if they're not willing to say, well, genocide against the Jews maybe there's context, maybe it doesn't violate our code of conduct, then how can you expect students who are protesting right now to, be cautious in what they say and respectful in what they say? Because these students are also out there now in force, not just calling for the genocide of the Jewish people, but in certain cases, they are beating students and telling them, go back to Poland, or telling them, we're going to finish what Hitler started. It comes down from the top. You have faculty who are saying certain things as well. I've seen it in medical schools, I've seen it in graduate schools, I've seen it on every single level. The rise in anti-Semitism happens when nobody is willing to stand up and speak out. And why would you think, if there are no consequences, if there are no consequences when the president of an elite university says it, then why would you think there are going to be consequences for anybody who is less than the president of a university, so a faculty member or a student or anybody else? You have to lead by example, and if you're not leading by example, then you're letting the genie out of the bottle. Once you let the genie out of the bottle, it's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle. It's like when you're a parent and you tell your kid, I don't want you to use a certain word, and then your child hears you use that word. It's the same thing.
To your genie in the bottle analogy, it does feel like this is very unresolved. There is a sort of genie out of the bottle right now. We're seeing still protests. There's not a resolution here. Just today, before you and I talked, Columbia did cancel its main graduation. And in your piece, you wrote, right now, we are in the middle of this story. What does the end look like?
Honestly, I'm afraid. I'm afraid for what the end looks like. I'm a Jew who has relatives who died in the Holocaust. I'm an activist. I'm somebody who believes in ethics. I'm somebody who believes in the good of humankind, and I'm somebody who believes in our ability as a society to learn from the past and protect the future. What we're seeing now scares me. It scares me for the future of my children. It scares me for the future of society, democracy, everything that I said in that article. Because we need people who are going to stand up and speak out against the treatment of people as unequal. When you look back at the Holocaust, to me what stands out is that an entire society was able to turn against their neighbors. These are people who they had over for dinner. These are people who kids played with. They were friends. Families went out to dinner. And all of a sudden, they were the enemy. They were the other. College campuses. College is a place you go to. You meet friends for life. People that come from different backgrounds. People that came from different states or different countries. They're not like you. You didn't grow up with them. But something bonded you in college, right? You took a class together or you had a night out together or something like that. And that's the beauty of college, right? You sat together outside maybe on a nice day, you had a conversation. what's happening to that? What's happening to that? What is happening to our ability to look at each other and find the similarities that bring us together and unite us? Instead, it's not one place. It's not Columbia. It's not Harvard. It's not UPenn. It's not Yale. It seems like it's everywhere. And it seems like this hatred is spreading. Because it's not just anti-Semitism. When one hate rises, all hate rises. So we see this rise in Islamophobia as well. And we see this rise in xenophobia. And you wonder, where's it going to stop? When is it going to stop? Because, like I said, once the genie is out of the bottle, how do you put it back in? Where does it end? There don't seem to be consequences. There don't seem to be people who are saying enough. There doesn't seem to be a way that the administrators at these places, at these colleges and these universities, are able to bring people together. Canceling a commencement ceremony? I never thought we'd get to this place. I never thought we would.
It is shocking to hear, because commencement, everyone has fond memories that graduated from high school or college of their commencement ceremony. It's a celebration of all of your accomplishments. And not only that, but your parents and whoever helped you along the way. So I guess what do you think really the solution then is? What do people need to say? And like, it continues to be my question, because it's like, what do people say at the top that would satisfy and calm down this tension?
So I think that there are several things that could be done right now. I think, the first thing is, I look at the analogy kind of to a sports team. If you have like a professional sports team and you have somebody who doesn't abide by their code of conduct, there are consequences, right? These are professional athletes, but if they do something that violates the team's code of conduct, they sit out, right? They're suspended from a game or multiple games. It doesn't matter how good they are. It doesn't matter, if they're the star player. You violate the code of conduct, there are consequences. The same thing with a college or a university. If you go to a college and you're caught cheating, there are consequences. So I'm not sure why we're not holding people accountable in the same way here. If you go to a college or a university and you're told multiple times that you need to vacate the encampment, and you don't vacate the encampment, there should be consequences. If you break into an administrative building, a university administrative building, you barricade yourself in it, and then you deface school property, there need to be consequences. It should be very simple. Nothing about this has wound up being simple, but we need to bring it back to just, again, the simple facts of what we're talking about. Again, there's no reason. How does that not violate the code of conduct? So administrators need to, get some of their power back. And I don't think, again, that it needs to be very complicated. I think the president of the University of Florida, I think, did a great job with his statement, where he said, this isn't a daycare. We came to you multiple times, and, we gave you many chances. This is what we said. You didn't listen. And, now there's going to be consequences. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think that all colleges and universities have to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. If we don't have a standard definition of anti-Semitism, then it's very easy to say, well, this isn't anti-Semitism, this is a peaceful protest. Whereas if you have a standardized definition of anti-Semitism, you can say, well, no, that sign actually is anti-Semitic and therefore is likely to incite some type of violence or, is likely to cause people to, be upset, things like that. It shouldn't be up to one college or one university to say, this is what anti-Semitism is, or no, this is what anti-Semitism is. We need a solid definition. We need to know what anti-Semitism is. We need to be able to call it out in the same way that we would call out any other form of identity-based hate. Once we have a definition of anti-Semitism, then again, to me, it goes back to, a very simplistic answer, which is, if you see something, say something. If you see an example of anti-Semitism on campus, then there need to be consequences. And these consequences need to be clear, they need to be concise, they need to be actionable, they need to come from the top down, and they need to be stated up front ahead of time so everybody knows. To me, again, these are things that should not be that difficult. They shouldn't be that difficult, and they should be something that we are working on right at this moment, so that when this current crisis passes, which I hope that it does, I hope that it does. Again, I'm a bit of an optimist. I believe that it will. We're ready. We're ready for whatever comes next, because unfortunately, there's always a next time, right? There's always something around the corner, and university presidents need to be prepared for that. That's their job. Again, keeping students safe, that's how you keep students safe.
You said this earlier in the conversation that college, for a lot of students, is the first time you're confronted with people from all walks of life, all religions, all backgrounds, all different ways of thinking. So do you think there will ever be a point, or how do we get to a point where students at college and people in this country can have a respectful dialogue about this conflict without the hate attached to it?
Now, I told you I was an optimist, but I'm also a realist. Look, I don't know if we're ever going to get to that point. To me, that would be like if I were writing a movie and I wanted to put in like the best possible ending. That would be the best possible ending. I think you try. You try, you do your best. I think it would be great if we had some type of training, some type of course. I don't even know whether you want to call it DEI. I don't know what you want to call it. I think, honestly, the idea is teaching people how to disagree respectfully, teaching people how to be open-minded to people who aren't like them, because that is the challenge of college, but that's also the beauty of college. So learning how to understand and appreciate that, it makes your college experience so much better, and it makes your life so much better, because nobody exists in a vacuum. Nobody exists in a bubble. The beauty of America, right, is that we're all different, and we're stronger united than we are divided. So if we can find a way to somehow harness that power and, harness our ability to appreciate our differences, appreciate, the unique nature of each individual, and respect everybody's human dignity. I mean, the sky's the limit for really how wonderful our nation could be, and how wonderful if you could even take that past our nation, the peace that we could achieve. Again, if I was writing a movie, that would be the end of the movie for me. Whether or not we can achieve it is a different story.
Well, Dr. Gallin, thank you so much for the conversation today. I really appreciate your insights, and I hope you come back soon.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.